Welcome to the subconscious. Tonight, you're invited to embark on two journeys. Two stories woven with warmth, mystery, and gentle adventure, created specifically for minds that wander. First, The Train That Never Stops, a tale of endless movement and hidden truths. Follow Elio as he boards a train that never slows, a place where every door opens into a new world, each carriage holding a story of its own. But as he travels deeper, a question lingers. Why was he brought here? And what happens if the train finally stops? Then, step into the house of ever-changing rooms where no two spaces are ever the same. A kitchen filled with the scent of fresh bread, a library where books write themselves, a garden that breathes. But at its heart, the house holds a secret, one that has been waiting to be remembered. These aren't just bedtime stories. They're carefully crafted experiences, designed to gently hold your attention without demanding it, to pull you in without pulling you too hard. For ADHD minds, the world can feel too loud, too fast, too full of unfinished thoughts. These stories are built differently. They follow a rhythm that allows your mind to drift without losing the thread. They offer twists that spark curiosity, but never urgency. They are immersive, but always soft enough to carry you toward sleep. So get comfortable. Let the words guide you. There is no rush, no pressure, only the quiet hum of a train, the shifting walls of a house, and the gentle pull of a story that never truly ends. This is your journey now, and it's time to begin. Story 1. The Train That Never Stops. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of fresh rain and warm bread from the bakery down the street. Elio stood at the doorway of his small home, staring down at the ticket in his hand. It had arrived 2 days ago, tucked inside a deep blue envelope with gold lettering. Board the train that never stops. Destination, wherever you wish. At first, he thought it was a joke, maybe a mistake, but when he held the ticket up to the light, the gold lettering shimmered as if it was alive. Something about it made his chest tighten with excitement. Elio had always dreamed of adventure. Not just the kind found in books or whispered about in late-night conversations, but real adventure. The kind that makes your heart race and your soul wake up. He had spent his entire life in the same small town, where the roads never changed, and the people lived on repeat. But now he had a golden ticket to somewhere unknown. With a small leather satchel slung over his shoulder, he stepped onto the cobbled street. His heartbeat quickened as he walked toward the station. The world around him buzzed with morning energy. Shopkeepers setting up displays, pigeons cooing from rooftops, a street musician strumming a soft tune on his guitar. But something felt off. As he walked, time itself seemed to stretch. The sky above was stuck in a strange shade between dawn and midday, as if the sun had forgotten where it was supposed to be. People around him moved a little too slowly, their voices distant, their laughter echoing in ways that didn't feel natural. Then he reached the train station. It should have been bustling with travelers, people rushing to catch their rides. But instead, the platform was silent. The only sound was the faint rustling of the wind, carrying whispers he couldn't quite understand. And then, just like that, the train appeared. It didn't rush in with the clatter of wheels or the screech of metal. It simply arrived, as if it had been there all along, waiting for him to notice. The train was unlike any he had ever seen. Its body was a deep midnight blue, speckled with flecks of silver, like a night sky full of stars. The windows shimmered, reflecting places he didn't recognize: rolling sand dunes, towering waterfalls, glowing forests. He hesitated, his fingers tightening around the ticket. Was this real? A small brass plaque near the door read, "The train that never stops. Step inside when you're ready." The door slid open on its own. Warm, golden light spilled out, casting long shadows on the empty platform. A soft voice, neither male nor female, neither young nor old, whispered in his ear, "You are expected." Elio swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. The adventure had begun. Elio's breath caught as he stepped into the first carriage. It was a grand hall of maps. The walls were covered in parchment, old scrolls, and hand-painted charts of lands he had never seen. Some maps showed rivers that flowed upwards. Others had floating islands that drifted with the wind. There were maps drawn on glass where cities moved on their own, shifting like pieces on a board. In the center of the room stood a massive globe. It spun slowly, glowing faintly as though it held real sunlight inside. When he stepped closer, he swore he saw tiny storms swirling, waves crashing, and even little lights blinking like cities at night. At the far end of the room, an elderly man sat behind a desk, surrounded by stacks of books and compasses of all sizes. His beard was long and silver, his eyes a deep shade of amber. He wore a thick velvet coat, covered in tiny constellations that shifted as he moved. "Ah, a new traveler," the man said warmly, adjusting his spectacles. "I am Cartwright, the map keeper. Every passenger must choose their first destination before the train moves forward." Elio hesitated. "I don't know where I want to go yet." Cartwright chuckled. "You don't have to. The train knows. It listens to your heart, even if you don't." Elio raised an eyebrow, but before he could ask any questions, the floor beneath him gave a soft shudder. The train was moving. Outside the window, the station was gone, replaced by rolling green hills stretching endlessly beneath a golden sky. The air outside shimmered, as if the land itself was alive. The trees swayed even though there was no wind. Cartwright tapped the spinning globe, and a glowing line traced itself along one of the maps on the wall. "Your first stop," he said, smiling. "The City of Echoes, a place where every sound ever made still lingers in the air. Perhaps you'll find something that was lost." Elio felt a thrill of excitement. "And after that?" Cartwright gestured toward the train doors leading to the next carriage. "You will move forward, coach by coach, story by story. Each door opens when it is time, but be warned, once you leave a carriage, you cannot return." Elio nodded, gripping the strap of his bag. He didn't know what lay ahead, but that was the best part of any adventure. Taking a deep breath, he stepped through the next door. The door to the next carriage opened without a sound, revealing a long corridor bathed in soft, golden light. Elio stepped forward cautiously, feeling the temperature shift slightly. The train's rhythmic movement beneath his feet was comforting, like a steady heartbeat guiding him forward. The scent of parchment and ink from the map room faded, replaced by something unfamiliar. A whisper of old rain, distant laughter, and the faintest hum of a forgotten song. He stepped through the doorway, and suddenly he wasn't inside the train anymore. The ground beneath him was smooth, like polished stone, reflecting the pale glow of a massive moon that hung low in the sky. Surrounding him were tall, ancient buildings, their walls covered in intricate carvings and spiraling ivy that moved as though breathing. The air was thick, not heavy, but alive with sound. Not new sounds, but old ones. A child's giggle floated past him, though no one was there. A distant bell rang, its chime fading into silence before repeating itself moments later. Somewhere, he could hear the sharp clatter of hooves on cobblestones, as if a carriage had just passed. Yet the street was empty. Elio turned in place, listening. This was a city made of memories. Cartwright had said it was called the City of Echoes, but he hadn't explained what that meant. Now, Elio understood. Every sound that had ever been made here still existed, repeating on an endless loop, waiting to be heard again. His footsteps made no noise as he moved forward. He passed by a dry fountain, its stone cracked with age. From within, he heard the faint splash of water that no longer flowed. "This is incredible," he murmured to himself. His own voice did not echo. That was the strangest part. Only the past could be heard here. He wandered deeper into the city, passing under archways lined with glowing lanterns. Each alleyway seemed to hold its own story, its own collection of voices trapped in time. A whisper brushed past his ear. "Are you lost?" Elio stopped. The voice had been soft, uncertain, almost hesitant. Unlike the other echoes, this one felt personal. It wasn't a distant memory from the city. It was meant for him. He turned, but no one was there. "Who said that?" he asked aloud. Silence. Then, just when he thought he had imagined it, the voice returned, clearer this time. "You're not supposed to be here yet." A shiver ran down his spine, not from fear, but from curiosity. "Who are you?" No answer. Only the sound of wind weaving through the empty streets, carrying with it the echoes of voices long gone. Elio took a slow breath, trying to steady himself. He had come here to explore, to understand. Whatever this city was, it held stories, and stories always had answers if you listened closely enough. A narrow street led him to an enormous stone building with towering doors made of dark oak. Above them, a worn plaque read, "Library of Unfinished Words." Elio reached for the handle, expecting resistance, but the doors swung open effortlessly. Inside, the air was cool and heavy with the scent of old books. Shelves stretched endlessly in every direction, filled with volumes that seemed to hum softly, as if whispering to themselves. A hunched figure stood behind a curved desk, sorting through a stack of papers. "Excuse me," Elio said cautiously. The figure looked up, revealing a face lined with age but softened by kindness. His eyes were clouded with time, yet they held a spark of something timeless. "You're new here," the old man observed, setting down his papers. "I think so," Elio replied. "What is this place?" The man smiled. "A library, of course." "But what kind of library?" "One that keeps track of words that were never finished," the librarian said simply. "Letters that were never sent, speeches that were never given, stories that were left unwritten. They all exist here, waiting to be completed." Elio blinked, processing the weight of those words. "That's kind of sad." The librarian chuckled. "Or beautiful. Every unfinished word holds potential. Some stories are waiting for the right person to finish them." He gestured toward a nearby table where a single open book rested. The pages were blank except for a single line written in faded ink. If you are reading this, you are part of the story now. A chill ran down Elio's spine, not out of fear, but excitement. "What happens if I write something?" he asked. The librarian's smile deepened. "That, my dear traveler, is entirely up to you." Before Elio could respond, a sharp sound cut through the air. Not an echo, not a memory, something new. A note, pure and unmistakable, like the chime of a crystal bell. The librarian stiffened. "That is impossible." Elio turned toward the doorway. Outside, the city remained unchanged, silent except for its lingering ghosts of sound. Yet something new had entered this place, and it had called to him. The librarian stepped forward, his expression unreadable. If something new has been spoken here, it means one of two things. Elio swallowed. What are the options? Either someone else has entered the city, the librarian said slowly, his gaze drifting toward the moonlit streets, or something that was lost has finally been found. A thrill of anticipation raced through Elio's chest. This was no ordinary journey. This city had secrets, and he had only just begun to uncover them. Taking one last glance at the unfinished book, he stepped back toward the door. The next sound would decide where he went next. And he was ready to listen. The sound still lingered in the air, crisp, pure, impossibly new. Elio stepped forward, listening intently. Unlike the other voices of the City of Echoes, this sound didn't fade and repeat. It wasn't a memory. It was real. The librarian had gone still, his wrinkled fingers resting on the desk, his expression unreadable. "Is this, bad?" Elio asked, his voice hushed, as if speaking too loudly might break something delicate. The old man's gaze remained fixed on the open doorway. "It's not bad," he said at last, "but it is unexpected." Elio felt something shift in the air, like the whole city was holding its breath. The echoes that had once danced freely, the laughter, the footsteps, the murmured words of forgotten people, were quiet now. Whatever had made that sound had silenced the past itself. A single thought flickered through Elio's mind. What if it's calling to me? Without another word, he turned toward the door and stepped back out into the moonlit city. The streets were emptier than before, though Elio wasn't sure how that was possible. The echoes of the past, once swirling all around him, had retreated into silence. He walked slowly, listening, waiting for another clue. A bell tolled faintly in the distance. Not an echo, a real bell ringing in real time. His feet moved before his mind had even processed the decision. He followed the sound through narrow alleyways, past towering stone buildings covered in ivy. The deeper he walked into the city, the more it felt like stepping into a dream. The world was too still, the air too charged with anticipation. Then, up ahead, he saw it. A small stone bridge arched over a narrow canal, its waters shimmering in the moonlight. At the center of the bridge stood a girl. She was dressed in deep blue robes, embroidered with silver thread that shimmered like the night sky. Long dark hair cascaded down her back, and her bare feet rested lightly on the smooth stones. She held something in her hands, a small silver bell. Elio froze. She turned slowly, and when their eyes met, A soft smile curved her lips. "You heard it," she said simply. Her voice was real, not an echo. Elio swallowed, stepping forward cautiously. "Who are you?" "I could ask you the same thing," she said, tilting her head slightly. He hesitated. "I'm just passing through." "Through the city of echoes?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Few people come here by accident." Elio glanced around. "You're not an echo." Her smile widened. "Neither are you." A gust of wind stirred the water beneath the bridge, sending ripples of silver across the canal's surface. The moment stretched between them. Two strangers meeting in a place where time had no hold. Finally, she lifted the small bell in her hands and rang it once. The sound was impossibly clear, like light made into music. The echoes returned all at once. A rush of laughter, whispered secrets, songs sung centuries ago. The city exhaled, its stories stirring once more. Elio shivered. "What did you do?" The girl lowered the bell. "I woke them up." She stepped down from the bridge, her robes barely making a sound as they brushed against the stone. "I'm Noor," she said, offering her hand. "I'm the keeper of forgotten sounds." Elio shook her hand cautiously. "That's a pretty specific job." She laughed, a real, living laugh. The first he had heard in this city. "Someone has to do it." "So you collect sounds?" he asked, glancing at the bell. Noor nodded. "This city keeps every sound ever made. But sometimes things slip through the cracks. A voice lost too soon. A song unfinished. A story that was never told." Her fingers tightened around the bell. "I bring them back." Elio stared at her, trying to make sense of it all. This place had felt like a ghost town when he arrived, but now, with Noor standing here, it felt alive again. He hesitated before asking, "Why did you ring it just now?" Noor's expression grew thoughtful. "Because I heard a voice I'd never heard before." Elio's breath caught. "Me?" She nodded. "You're new to the city, but you're also—" She frowned slightly, as if struggling to find the right words. "You're not just a visitor. The echoes recognize you." A strange chill ran down his spine. "What does that mean?" he asked. Noor turned toward the canal, watching the rippling water. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." A sudden gust of wind whipped through the city, carrying with it a flood of voices. "I was here once. Don't forget me. Where did the years go?" Noor tilted her head, listening. They're awake now. Elio turned slowly, letting the whispers swirl around him. They weren't chaotic or frightening, just memories, surfacing after being buried for too long. Then, something strange happened. Among the countless voices, he heard one clearly. It was a voice he had never heard before, yet somehow it was speaking to him. Elio. His whole body tensed. The echoes never spoke new words. They repeated the past. And yet, somehow, one had just called his name. Noor's eyes widened slightly. "You heard it, didn't you?" Elio nodded slowly. "That's not supposed to happen, is it?" Noor studied him for a long moment before shaking her head. "No." A long silence stretched between them. Then, softly, she asked, "Do you want to find out why?" Elio hesitated for only a moment before answering. Yes. Noor's smile returned. Then follow me. She turned and walked down the narrow path beside the canal, her bell still clasped in her hands. Elio took one last look at the moonlit city around him. The glowing lanterns, the whispering winds, the echoes that never faded. Then he followed her into the unknown. Elio followed Noor along the narrow path beside the canal, the soft glow of lanterns reflecting off the water. The city around them felt more alive than before. The echoes had returned, whispers of laughter, distant footsteps, the hum of a melody that had been sung centuries ago. But one voice had stood apart from the rest. It had called his name. Elio's heart was still hammering from the moment he'd heard it. His name wasn't part of this city's past. He had never been here before. So why had the echoes spoken directly to him? Noor walked ahead, silent, her fingers tightening around the silver bell in her hands. The soft chime it had made earlier had woken the city's memories, but Elio had the unsettling feeling that it had also awakened something else, something neither of them fully understood yet. Hay arrived at a massive circular plaza, its center marked by a tall archway made of smooth black stone. Strange symbols covered its surface, shifting slightly as if they were being rewritten over and over again. Beyond the archway, an enormous hall stretched into the distance. Its ceiling was impossibly high, vanishing into soft golden mist. Thousands of glass orbs hovered in the air, each one glowing faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. Elio's breath caught. What is this place? Noor exhaled slowly. The Hall of Lost Voices. She stepped forward and reached for one of the glowing orbs. As soon as her fingers brushed against it, a whisper bloomed into the air. I should have told you how much I cared. The words dissolved into silence just as quickly as they had come. Noor let go of the orb, turning to Elio. These are voices that were lost before they could be heard, she explained. Words that were never spoken, secrets never shared, regrets never voiced. Elio shivered. The air was thick with unspoken goodbyes, forgotten stories, words trapped between lifetimes. But why would my name be here? He asked. I don't belong to this city. Noor frowned, deep in thought. Then, without answering, she turned and walked toward the far end of the hall, where an enormous golden mirror stood against the wall. Its surface rippled like water, reflecting the orbs floating around them. She hesitated before speaking. If the city's echoes called to you, it means your name is in one of these orbs. Elio stiffened. That's impossible. Noor glanced at him, her gaze unreadable. Is it? Elio didn't move at first. His mind was racing. The train had taken him to this city for a reason, but this didn't make sense. He had never been here. He had never spoken words that had gone unheard. Had he? Noor stepped closer to the golden mirror and rang her silver bell softly. A ripple of sound and light passed through the room. The orbs responded, shifting, rearranging themselves, forming patterns too intricate to understand. Then, one orb broke away from the others. It drifted down, hovering directly in front of Elio. A deep chill spread through his chest. He swallowed hard, staring at the glowing sphere. It pulsed gently, waiting. Noor watched him carefully. Do you want to hear it? Elio's throat was dry. He had come here looking for adventure. He had expected strange landscapes, impossible stories, things he had never seen before, but he had never expected to find himself. Taking a deep breath, he reached out. His fingers brushed against the orb, and the voice spoke. The whisper that filled the air was his own. "I'll come back for you. I promise." Elio stumbled backward, his heart slamming against his ribs. Noor caught his arm, steadying him. "Elio, what does it mean?" He shook his head. His mind felt like it was unraveling, memories shifting, pieces falling into place that he hadn't even known were missing. "I don't remember saying that," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it was me." Noor's grip on the bell tightened. "If your voice is here, it means those words were spoken once, but they were never heard." Elio's pulse pounded in his ears. He had promised someone he would come back. But who? When? Why? He didn't know. He couldn't remember. And that terrified him. Noor touched the orb lightly, and it floated back into the air, merging with the others once more. The whisper of Elio's own voice faded, but its weight remained in his chest. He turned to Noor, his thoughts tangled. How can I forget something so important? She studied him, as if trying to decide how much to tell him. Then, finally, she said, "The echoes never lie. If you spoke those words once, then they were real. Which means..." She glanced toward the golden mirror, her expression troubled. "Someone is waiting for you to keep your promise." Elio's breath caught. His journey on the train had always been about discovery, adventure, mystery. But now, it was something more. Now, it was personal. A memory had been stolen from him, buried somewhere in the depths of time. And he was going to find it. Noor turned toward the exit of the hall, her bell still held firmly in her hands. "We should go." Elio nodded, his heart pounding with questions he didn't have answers to yet. He took one last look at the floating orbs, the silent whispers of forgotten voices. Then he followed Noor through the door, deeper into the mystery. Elio stepped back onto the train, his mind still spinning with questions. The memory he had uncovered in the City of Echoes clung to him like a thread just out of reach. Something that had once been woven into the fabric of his life but had since unraveled. "I'll come back for you. I promise." He had spoken those words. He had made that promise. But to whom? And why had the memory been lost? The doors slid shut behind him, sealing away the city and its whispers. The train hummed beneath his feet, the steady rhythm of its movement grounding him in the present. Noor walked beside him, silent, thoughtful. The bell she carried was still and quiet now, its chime resting. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the train as it glided effortlessly forward, carrying them deeper into the unknown. Then, up ahead, a door unlocked itself with a quiet click. Elio and Noor exchanged a glance. "The next carriage," Noor murmured. Elio nodded and stepped forward, gripping the handle. The air beyond the door shimmered slightly, as if he were stepping through a thin veil between realities. He pulled the door open. The moment Elio stepped inside, he was surrounded by paper. Letters. Thousands of them. Maybe tens of thousands. They filled the room, stacked in tall wooden cubbies, scattered across tables, tucked into drawers that lined the walls. Some were neatly sealed with wax stamps, while others were old and brittle, their ink fading. The air smelled like parchment, like time itself had settled into the room. Noor stepped in behind him, her eyes widening as she took it all in. "This is—" She trailed off, running a finger along a nearby envelope. "Incredible." Elio approached one of the tables. A single envelope rested at its center, different from the others. The paper was pale blue, the edges worn. Unlike the other letters, it had no name, no address, just a single word written in the center. Elio. His chest tightened. He reached out slowly, fingertips brushing against the paper. The moment he touched it, a familiar feeling rushed through him, a sense of longing, of something unfinished. He swallowed hard. Why is my name on this? Noor stepped closer, watching carefully. Open it. Elio hesitated. Something inside him whispered that whatever was inside this letter would change everything. But he had to know. With careful fingers, he slid a nail under the flap and unfolded the letter. The handwriting inside was delicate, but rushed, as if the writer had been in a hurry. He began to read. Elio, I don't know if you'll ever find this. I don't even know if you'll remember me. But if you do, if you ever step back onto this train, I need you to know. You made a promise. The words blurred for a moment. Elio's breath came faster. He forced himself to keep reading. You said you'd come back. You said you'd find me. But something happened, Elio. Something changed. The train doesn't stop, but you did. You left. And when you left, I disappeared. I don't know how long it's been. I don't even know if time moves the same way anymore. But if you find this letter, if you remember anything, please come back for me. The letter ended there. No name, no signature, just those final pleading words. Elio's hands trembled as he lowered the paper. His mind was spinning, his heartbeat loud in his ears. Someone had written this to him. Someone who had once been part of his life, part of his journey, and he had forgotten them. Noor broke the silence. Elio, she said softly, what does it say? Elio swallowed hard. Someone's waiting for me. Noor frowned, stepping closer. Who? I don't know. His voice was barely above a whisper. But I promised to come back for them. A long silence stretched between them. Noor glanced around the room, her eyes sweeping over the endless stacks of letters. This place, she said thoughtfully. It doesn't just hold forgotten letters, it holds forgotten connections. People who were meant to find each other, but never did. Messages that were lost before they could be read. Elio gripped the letter tightly. Then why was this one waiting for me? Noor hesitated. Because, she exhaled, because you were supposed to find it. Elio turned, scanning the shelves of letters. How many stories were hidden here? How many unfinished conversations? How many promises unfulfilled? But none of them mattered. Not right now. Because one of them was his. And that meant somewhere, someone was waiting for him. Elio folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his pocket. His pulse was still racing, but a new feeling was settling over him now. Determination. I have to figure out who wrote this, he said. Noor nodded. And the train will help. She turned toward the far end of the carriage, where another door stood waiting. Its handle gleamed in the soft light, a silent invitation to continue forward. Elio took a deep breath. The train had brought him here for a reason. It had given him this letter, this mystery. And now, it was time to find out where the next clue would lead. Without hesitation, he stepped toward the door and pulled it open. The train carried on, steady as ever. But now, Elio had a destination. Elio stepped into the next carriage, his fingers still wrapped tightly around the letter in his pocket. His mind swirled with questions, but one echoed louder than the rest. Who had written to him? The moment he crossed the threshold, the door behind him closed with a gentle click. The air in this carriage was different, lighter, almost electric. He felt it hum against his skin, not unpleasant but strange, like the space itself was thrumming with possibility. Above him, the ceiling was unlike anything he had seen before. A vast sky stretched overhead, deep indigo fading into endless stars. It wasn't just painted, it was real, shifting, alive. The train had opened up to the cosmos itself. The floor beneath him was solid, made of smooth glass or something like it, but just beneath the surface, swirling nebulae spun lazily, their colors shifting between blues, purples, and burning gold. For a moment, Elio forgot about the letter, about the mystery, about everything. He was standing inside the stars. A voice broke the silence. "I was wondering when you'd get here." Elio turned sharply. In the center of the carriage stood a figure, a man older than Elio but not by much. He had a quiet presence, the kind that felt both welcoming and unreadable at the same time. His dark coat shimmered slightly, reflecting the stars around him. His eyes, an unusual shade of deep silver, flickered with something ancient. "Who are you?" Elio asked cautiously. The man smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Someone who remembers things." Elio frowned. Remembers what? People, stories, promises. He tilted his head slightly. Things that others have forgotten. Elio's fingers brushed against the letter in his pocket. He could feel the weight of it, the urgency wrapped within its words. "Do you know who wrote this?" he asked, voice steady. The man's gaze flicked to his pocket. "I might." Elio exhaled. "Can you tell me?" The man studied him for a long moment, then turned his gaze upward. "The answer is already written. You just need to look in the right place." Elio followed his gaze. The stars above them shimmered, their light pulsing gently. Then, without warning, they shifted. Lines began to form between them, tracing patterns across the sky. At first, Elio thought they were constellations, shapes of animals, mythical figures, the things people imagined when they looked at the night sky. But then, the lines rearranged. They twisted, connected, bent into something else entirely. A name. One single word, glowing bright in the cosmic tapestry. Seraphine. Elio's breath caught. The name wasn't familiar, yet somehow it still sent a tremor through his chest, like an old melody he had once known but couldn't place. His throat felt tight. Who is that? The man finally looked at him again. His silver eyes were calm, steady. "You tell me," he said simply. Elio opened his mouth, but no words came. His mind was scrambling, searching through memories that didn't exist. He shouldn't know this name, but he did. Somewhere deep inside him, something recognized it. I don't. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration flickering beneath his skin. I don't understand. The man gave a small nod, as if he had expected that answer. Not yet. Elio clenched his jaw. Can you tell me who she is? The man sighed softly, as if considering his words carefully. Then he stepped forward and placed a hand on Elio's shoulder. I could tell you, he said, but it wouldn't mean anything until you remember for yourself. Elio swallowed hard, his pulse hammering. How do I do that? The man stepped back. Keep moving forward. Elio exhaled, trying to push back the frustration clawing at his chest. He was tired of riddles, tired of half-answers. He had found a letter written to him. He had seen a name written in the stars, but none of it explained why he felt like something had been stolen from him. He turned back to the night sky above them. The name was still there, glowing softly, a reminder of something just out of reach. Seraphine. The train let out a low, distant hum, as if sensing the moment. Elio straightened. What's in the next carriage? The man smiled again, this time with something knowing in his expression. Something closer to the truth. Elio nodded slowly. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he was starting to understand something. This train wasn't just taking him on an adventure. It was taking him back to something. Something he had lost. Something that had been erased. Someone. His fingers curled around the letter once more, his pulse steady now. He wasn't afraid anymore. He was ready. Without another word, he turned toward the next door, the next step forward, the next unraveling piece of the truth. And as the door unlocked with a soft click, the stars above him shifted once more. Elio placed his hand on the door handle, feeling a faint vibration beneath his fingertips. The train was alive, shifting, moving, not just through space, but through something deeper. Time. He exhaled and pulled the door open. A rush of cool air greeted him, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth and something else, something warm and familiar, though he couldn't quite name it. He stepped forward, and the moment he crossed the threshold, a strange sensation washed over him. He had been here before, even though he knew that was impossible. The carriage stretched before him like a grand hall, but it was unlike any of the others he had seen. Instead of a train compartment, he was standing in an infinite corridor, lined with doors on either side. Each door was different. Some were wooden, some were glass, some were carved from stone. A few shimmered as though made of light itself. They stretched into the distance, seemingly endless. He turned to Noor, who had followed him inside. What is this place? She was staring at the doors, her expression unreadable. The door of memories. Elio swallowed. Whose memories? Noor turned her silver bell over in her hands. Everyone's. A chill ran down his spine. Every memory that has ever been made, every forgotten moment, every lost story, every time someone swore they would remember but didn't, it all comes here. She turned toward him. And I think one of these doors belongs to you. Elio's fingers curled into fists. This train was leading him somewhere, pushing him toward something he had once known. The letter. The name in the stars. Seraphine. He needed answers. Without waiting, he moved forward, running his hand along the edges of the doors as he passed them. Some were locked, some were slightly ajar. Whispers drifted from within, fragments of memories trapped inside. A child laughing. A song hummed under a breath. A whispered goodbye. He pushed forward. Then, as if drawn by instinct, he stopped in front of a door. It was simple. Plain wood, a brass handle. But carved into the surface was something that made his heart stop. His own name. Elio reached out, pressing his palm against the door. The wood was warm beneath his touch, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. Noor took a cautious step back. "Are you sure?" Number. He wasn't, but he turned the handle anyway. The door swung open, and suddenly, he wasn't on the train anymore. He was standing in a field of golden grass, stretching endlessly beneath a violet sky. The air was thick with warmth, filled with the scent of wildflowers. The place was familiar. The wind stirred, and a single voice carried through the air. "You promised, Elio." His breath caught. Ahead, standing on a small hill, was a girl. Her back was to him, long dark hair billowing in the wind. She wore a white linen dress, simple but elegant. Her hands were clasped in front of her, and even from this distance he could feel the weight of her presence. Seraphine. The name echoed in his mind. She turned slowly. The moment he saw her face, something inside him broke open. A flood of memories, rushing back all at once. A friendship built over years. A bond unshaken by time. A promise made beneath the stars. And then, an ending. Pain. Loss. A door closing. His stomach twisted. I know you." Seraphine smiled softly. "You did." Elio stumbled forward, breath uneven. "What happened to us?" Her expression darkened slightly. "The train took you away." He froze. "What?" She took a slow step closer, studying him with something between sadness and understanding. "You left, Elio. Not by choice, but you left. And when you did, the train took me, too." Elio's pulse roared in his ears. "That's not possible." Seraphine's gaze softened. "Isn't it?" The wind shifted, and suddenly, fragments of their past played in the air around them, sitting together under a starlit sky, whispering secrets, laughing as they ran through endless fields, racing the wind, holding hands beneath a great oak tree, swearing they'd never forget. Then, darkness. Seraphine fading, her voice calling out, Elio being pulled away. He clutched his head, overwhelmed. The train had taken him, and in doing so, it had erased her. She had become a memory lost in time, and now he had found her again. Elio lifted his head. "I promised you." Seraphine nodded. "Yes." "I said I'd come back." "Yes." He exhaled sharply. "But I don't understand. Why did the train take me?" She hesitated. "Because that's what it does. It carries those who are meant to travel. It moves through worlds, through time, through memories." Elio swallowed hard. "And you?" Seraphine's lips parted, but no sound came. A sadness flickered across her face. "I wasn't supposed to be forgotten," she whispered. Something inside him ached. He had lost her. But now, standing here, in this golden place that existed outside of time, he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't lose her again. He stepped forward, reaching for her hand. "Come with me." Seraphine's breath caught. Then, suddenly, the sky cracked. A deep rumbling sound echoed across the field, shaking the ground beneath them. The wind howled, pulling at their clothes. Seraphine's eyes widened in panic. No! The train was calling him back. The memory was collapsing. Elio tightened his grip on her hand. "I'm not leaving you." Seraphine's fingers curled around his. "Then don't." The golden field began to blur. The train's hum was growing louder, pulling him back toward the door. Seraphine squeezed his hand. "Elio, remember." The door slammed shut. Elio stumbled backward into the train, breath ragged. Noor caught his arm, steadying him. "Elio, what happened?" His chest heaved as he turned back to the door. His door. But it was gone. Vanished, as if it had never existed. His fingers curled into fists. Seraphine was real. She had been real, and she was still out there, somewhere, waiting. Noor's eyes searched his face. "Elio." He looked at her, determination burning in his chest. "I have to get her back." The train let out a low, distant hum. Ahead, another door unlocked. The train was still moving. And now, Elio knew exactly where he needed to go. The train hummed beneath Elio's feet, a steady pulse against the weight in his chest. He stood frozen, staring at the space where the door to the golden field had been. But it was gone, vanished, just like Seraphine. His breathing was sharp, uneven. He had seen her, touched her hand. He had remembered. And then, just as quickly, the train had ripped him away. "Elio." Noor's voice was careful, steady. "Tell me what happened." He turned to her, his pulse hammering. "She's real." Noor's brow furrowed. "Who?" "The girl in my memory, Seraphine." Saying the name out loud made it feel stronger, like a thread anchoring him to something that the train wanted him to forget. Noor hesitated. "And you think the train took her from you?" Elio exhaled sharply. "I don't think. I know. I promised her. I said I'd come back, and I never did." His fingers curled into fists. "But it wasn't my fault. The train stole her from me." Noor didn't argue. Instead, she studied him with careful consideration. "Then we have a problem." Elio blinked. "What?" She gestured toward the far end of the carriage. The next door had already unlocked itself, waiting for them to move forward. The train was carrying on, as it always did, pulling them toward new places, new stories. But Elio didn't want new stories. He wanted Seraphine. His jaw tightened. "I'm not going through that door." Noor let out a slow breath. "Elio." "I'm going back." His voice was firm now, unwavering. "I have to." Noor held his gaze, something unreadable in her expression. Then, after a long moment, she spoke. "You can't go back." The words slammed into him like a blow. Elio's hands trembled. "What do you mean?" Noor turned to face him fully. "That's the rule of the train, Elio. It only moves forward. No one goes back." His stomach twisted. "That's not true. The train took me back to my own memory, didn't it?" "Yes," she admitted. But it wasn't a real place, Elio. It was a memory carriage, not an actual destination. The train let you see what you lost, but it won't let you return to it. Something inside him cracked. "That's not fair," he whispered. Noor's face softened. "I know." Elio turned, his mind spinning. He had traveled through strange cities, through endless landscapes, through entire worlds, but never had he questioned the train itself. Until now. He faced Noor again, his heart pounding. "Then I'll break the rule." Noor stiffened. "Elio, no." His voice was strong now, certain. "I'm not going to let the train decide what I can and can't remember. I'm not going to leave her behind." For the first time, Noor looked genuinely uneasy. "Elio, this train isn't just a machine. It's alive. It doesn't let passengers decide where they go." Elio squared his shoulders. "Then it's time someone tried." Noor hesitated. Then, slowly, she smiled. "You really mean it, don't you?" Elio nodded. "I do." A pause. Then Noor reached up and rang her silver bell 3 times. The sound rippled through the train, vibrating in the walls, in the floor, in the very air. The train shuddered. Elio's breath caught. "What did you just do?" Noor exhaled. "You want to break the rules?" She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Then let's break them." The train groaned in protest, its steady rhythm faltering for the first time. Lights flickered. The air crackled with something heavy, something unseen. "Elio," Noor said, her voice low. "The train isn't happy." Good, Elio thought. He planted his feet, staring at the long corridor stretching before them. "How do we make it stop?" Noor hesitated. It's never stopped before. "Well, let's be the first." She studied him, then gave a small nod. "There's one way." Elio glanced at her. "Tell me." Noor lifted the bell again, gripping it tightly. "The train listens to the bell. It listens to me. If I command it to stop, it will try to resist. But if we force it, if we break the pattern..." She trailed off. Elio narrowed his eyes. "What?" Noor hesitated. "I don't know what will happen." A pulse of hesitation ran through him. But then he thought of Seraphine's face, of the way her voice had trembled when she said, "You weren't supposed to forget me." His resolve hardened. "Do it," he said. Noor inhaled sharply, then rang the bell one last time. The reaction was immediate. The train screamed. It wasn't a sound made of metal or engines. It was alive, furious, resisting. The walls trembled. The lights shattered. The floor shifted beneath them like liquid, like the train itself was trying to shake them off. Elio grabbed onto a railing, gritting his teeth. "Noor." "Hold on." Noor's voice was barely audible over the chaos. The train lurched. For the first time since he had boarded, it was slowing down. Elio's heart pounded. It was working. They were stopping. And then the floor collapsed. Elio's stomach dropped as he plunged downward into darkness. Wind howled around him, weightless, endless. Then, suddenly, he landed, softly, as if he had never fallen at all. Elio gasped, looking up. The train was gone. Noor was beside him, blinking in shock. She pushed herself upright, staring at their surroundings. They were no longer on the train. They were somewhere else. Elio turned slowly, his pulse hammering. And then he saw it. A single wooden door standing in the middle of an empty field. It was old, familiar. It was the door to Seraphine's memory. Elio's breath caught. It worked. Noor exhaled. We broke the rules. Elio stepped forward, heart racing. He reached out, and the door opened. A warm wind rushed past him, filled with the scent of wildflowers and rain. And on the other side, standing at the threshold, was Seraphine. Elio's chest tightened. He had done it. He had found her. She looked at him, her eyes full of something he couldn't name. "You came back," she whispered. Elio swallowed hard. "I promised." Seraphine's lips parted. And then behind him, the train roared back to life. Elio's heart pounded as he stood before Seraphine, the golden wind swirling around them. He had found her. After all the strange cities, the endless carriages, the stolen memories, he had broken the rules of the train and come back for her. But something was wrong. The air behind him shifted, the familiar hum of the train returning. Noor turned sharply, gripping the silver bell in her hands. "Elio," she said carefully, "it's not over." A shiver ran down his spine. He turned slowly and felt his breath hitch. The train was back. Not as a broken machine, not as something they had defeated, but as something that had always been watching. It wasn't waiting on tracks. It wasn't even moving. It was simply there, an endless presence stretching across the horizon, its deep blue exterior shimmering like the night sky. The windows flickered with shifting images, carriages he had visited, places he had been, memories he had uncovered. And at the center of it all, standing on the platform that hadn't existed a moment ago, was a figure dressed in black. Elio felt something deep in his bones, something cold and ancient. He didn't know who the figure was, but he knew one thing. They were not human. The figure's voice was smooth, steady. "You have broken the rule." Elio took a step forward, shielding Seraphine without thinking. "I don't care." His voice was firm. "I'm taking her with me." The figure tilted their head slightly. "Are you?" The question sent a chill through him. Something about the way they said it, like they knew something he didn't. Seraphine gripped his hand tighter. "Elio." The figure raised a single hand, and in an instant, time cracked. The golden sky above them split apart like glass, revealing an endless void beyond it. The landscape shuddered, breaking into fragments, dissolving. Elio staggered, the ground beneath his feet no longer solid, reality unraveling. And then, the truth came crashing down. He saw it all. The real reason the train never stopped. The train did not travel through space. It traveled through stories, through choices, through what could have been and what never was. It wasn't a machine. It wasn't a destination. It was the in-between, the place where things that should have been lost were given another chance. Every passenger had been chosen. Every stop had been deliberate. And Elio had never belonged here. His breath came in sharp gasps as the memories flooded back. Seraphine had never been taken. She had never been stolen away by the train. She had died a long time ago, and the promise he had made, the words he had sworn to her beneath a sky full of stars, "I'll come back for you." He hadn't been talking about a journey. He had been talking about life itself. He had lost her. She had been pulled from his world too soon, and in his grief, in his desperation, he had become a passenger on the train. Because the train did not take people randomly. It took people who had unfinished stories. And Elio's story had never ended properly. His life had moved forward, but his heart had remained behind. The train had given him time, given him worlds, given him a chance to remember. But now it had come for its payment. The figure in black stepped forward, their gaze steady. "You cannot take what is no longer yours." Elio's chest ached. "She is not a thing. She is a person. She is a memory." Elio shook his head. "Number. She is real." The train let out a low, deep hum. The figure's expression did not change. Then choose. Elio stiffened. Choose what? The wind shifted. "If you wish to stay here, you may. The train will allow it. You can remain in this place with Seraphine, live within the echoes of what was lost. Time will not move forward. You will never age. You will never leave." Elio's stomach twisted. "And if I don't? Then you must return." The figure's silver eyes gleamed. "Without her." The words cut through him like a knife. Behind him, Seraphine inhaled sharply. "Elio." He turned to her, and for the first time, he saw her. Not as a mystery, not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a soul that had never been able to move on. He had been the one keeping her here. His grief, his guilt, his refusal to let go. It had tethered her to a train that never stopped, a story that had never been able to end. Tears burned his eyes. "Seraphine." She smiled, but it was sad. "I always knew this was temporary." "No." His throat tightened. "No, I can fix this. I can—" She reached up and cupped his face, stopping him. "Elio," she whispered, "you found me." Her eyes shone with something deep, something he wasn't sure he was strong enough to face. "Now, let me go." His whole body trembled. The train rumbled beneath them, waiting. Seraphine stepped back, and for the first time since he had remembered her, she started to fade. "Elio," Noor whispered beside him. The choice was his. Stay in this dream forever, or wake up. Elio closed his eyes. Then, with every ounce of love left in his heart, he let her go. The world collapsed. The golden field, the violet sky, the scent of wildflowers, all of it vanished. A rush of wind pulled at him, dragging him backward, reality snapping into place. His chest ached. His mind reeled, but he didn't fight it. And just before the last piece of Seraphine's world faded away, he heard her voice. "Thank you." Then, silence. Elio opened his eyes. He was standing inside the train. The real train. Not a dream. Not a memory. Not a broken place between time. He inhaled sharply, the air thick, solid, real. His heart was still racing. his hands still shaking, but he was here, and Seraphine was gone. He turned slowly. Noor was standing beside him, watching carefully. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Elio exhaled shakily, pressing a hand over his chest. It hurt, but it was a different kind of pain now. Not the pain of losing her, the pain of accepting it. The train rumbled softly, and for the first time, Elio understood its purpose. It never stopped, because the people on it were never meant to stay. They were meant to move forward, just like he had to. The next door clicked open. Elio took a deep breath, and then, without looking back, he stepped through. Elio's heart pounded as he stood before Seraphine, the golden wind swirling around them. He had found her. After all the strange cities, the endless carriages, the stolen memories, he had broken the rules of the train and come back for her. But something was wrong. The air behind him shifted, the familiar hum of the train returning. Noor turned sharply, gripping the silver bell in her hands. "Elio," she said carefully, "it's not over." A shiver ran down his spine. He turned slowly and felt his breath hitch. The train was back. Not as a broken machine, not as something they had defeated, but as something that had always been watching. It wasn't waiting on tracks. It wasn't even moving. It was simply there, an endless presence stretching across the horizon, its deep blue exterior shimmering like the night sky. The windows flickered with shifting images, carriages he had visited, places he had been, memories he had uncovered. And at the center of it all, standing on the platform that hadn't existed a moment ago, was a figure dressed in black. Elio felt something deep in his bones, something cold and ancient. He didn't know who the figure was, but he knew one thing: they were not human. The figure's voice was smooth, steady. "You have broken the rule." Elio took a step forward, shielding Seraphine without thinking. "I don't care." His voice was firm. "I'm taking her with me." The figure tilted their head slightly. "Are you?" The question sent a chill through him. Something about the way they said it, like they knew something he didn't. Seraphine gripped his hand tighter. "Elio." The figure raised a single hand, and in an instant, time cracked. The golden sky above them split apart like glass, revealing an endless void beyond it. The landscape shuddered, breaking into fragments, dissolving. Elio staggered, the ground beneath his feet no longer solid, reality unraveling. And then, the truth came crashing down. He saw it all. The real reason the train never stopped. The train did not travel through space. It traveled through stories, through choices, through what could have been, and what never was. It wasn't a machine. It wasn't a destination. It was the in-between, the place where things that should have been lost were given another chance. Every passenger had been chosen. Every stop had been deliberate. And Elio had never belonged here. His breath came in sharp gasps as the memories flooded back. Seraphine had never been taken. She had never been stolen away by the train. She had died a long time ago. And the promise he had made, the words he had sworn to her beneath a sky full of stars, "I'll come back for you." He hadn't been talking about a journey. He had been talking about life itself. He had lost her. She had been pulled from his world too soon, and in his grief, in his desperation, he had become a passenger on the train. Because the train did not take people randomly. It took people who had unfinished stories. And Elio's story had never ended properly. His life had moved forward, but his heart had remained behind. The train had given him time, given him worlds, given him a chance to remember. But now it had come for its payment. The figure in black stepped forward, their gaze steady. You cannot take what is no longer yours. Elio's chest ached. She is not a thing. She is a person. She is a memory. Elio shook his head. Number. She is real. The train let out a low, deep hum. The figure's expression did not change. Then choose. Elio stiffened. Choose what? The wind shifted. If you wish to stay here, you may. The train will allow it. You can remain in this place with Seraphine, live within the echoes of what was lost. Time will not move forward. You will never age. You will never leave. Elio's stomach twisted. And if I don't? Then you must return. The figure's silver eyes gleamed. Without her. The words cut through him like a knife. Behind him, Seraphine inhaled sharply. Elio. He turned to her, and for the first time, he saw her. Not as a mystery, not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a soul that had never been able to move on. He had been the one keeping her here. His grief, his guilt, his refusal to let go. It had tethered her to a train that never stopped, a story that had never been able to end. Tears burned his eyes. Seraphine. She smiled, but it was sad. I always knew this was temporary. No. His throat tightened. No, I can fix this. I can... She reached up and cupped his face, stopping him. Elio, she whispered, you found me. Her eyes shone with something deep, something he wasn't sure he was strong enough to face. Now, let me go. His whole body trembled. The train rumbled beneath them, waiting. Seraphine stepped back, and for the first time since he had remembered her, she started to fade. Elio, Nor whispered beside him. The choice was his. Stay in this dream forever, or wake up. Elio closed his eyes. Then, with every ounce of love left in his heart, he let her go. The world collapsed. The golden field, the violet sky, the scent of wildflowers, all of it vanished. A rush of wind pulled at him, dragging him backward, reality snapping into place. His chest ached, his mind reeled, but he didn't fight it. And just before the last piece of Seraphine's world faded away, he heard her voice. "Thank you." Then, silence. Elio opened his eyes. He was standing inside the train. The real train. Not a dream. Not a memory. Not a broken place between time. He inhaled sharply, the air thick, solid, real. His heart was still racing, his hands still shaking, but he was here, and Seraphine was gone. He turned slowly. Noor was standing beside him, watching carefully. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Elio exhaled shakily, pressing a hand over his chest. It hurt, But it was a different kind of pain now. Not the pain of losing her, the pain of accepting it. The train rumbled softly, and for the first time, Elio understood its purpose. It never stopped, because the people on it were never meant to stay. They were meant to move forward, just like he had to. The next door clicked open. Elio took a deep breath, and then, without looking back, he stepped through. Story 2: The House of Ever-Changing Rooms. For this second story, I want to take you somewhere warm, whimsical, and endlessly cozy, but still with that sense of adventure that keeps ADHD minds engaged. Imagine a house. Not just any house, but one that changes every time you step through a door. Some rooms are impossibly vast. A library stretching into the clouds, a kitchen where the bread kneads itself, a garden where the seasons shift as you walk. Some are small and perfect. A bedroom where it always rains softly against the window. A tea shop where the owner has been waiting for you forever. There's no rush, no danger, no urgency. Just one simple mystery. Why does the house keep changing? And more importantly, who built it just for you? Now, let's begin. The House of Ever-Changing Rooms. The first thing I noticed when I woke up was the smell of cinnamon. Not just any cinnamon. Warm, deep, rich. The kind that clung to the edges of freshly baked bread. The kind that made you think of cozy mornings and thick blankets, of fireplaces crackling in the early hours of the day. I wasn't in my bed. I wasn't even in my house. I sat up slowly, blinking in the golden light filtering through the tall windows. The ceiling stretched high above me, crisscrossed with wooden beams, and the walls were lined with shelves overflowing with books, plants, and tiny trinkets I didn't recognize. The air was thick with warmth, and when I turned my head, I saw it. A kitchen. Not just any kitchen, a perfect kitchen. The kind you only see in illustrated fairy tales. Copper pots dangled above a thick wooden counter, their surfaces gleaming in the morning light. Jars of honey, dried lavender, and spices lined the shelves. And in the center of it all, resting on a wide stone oven, was a loaf of bread, still steaming from the heat. I blinked. I didn't know where I was, but I knew I was supposed to be here. There was a note on the counter, resting beside a blue ceramic mug. I pushed the blankets off my legs. When had I been covered in a blanket? And padded over to the counter, my socks soft against the wooden floorboards. The note was written in looping, old-fashioned handwriting. Welcome home. Eat first, then explore. I stared at the words for a long moment. Home? That wasn't right. I had a home, didn't I? A small gust of wind stirred through the kitchen, rustling the herbs that hung from the ceiling. The smell of cinnamon thickened. I looked down at the bread. It really did look good. I hesitated, but only for a second, before breaking off a piece. The crust was crisp, flaking slightly beneath my fingertips, and the inside was soft and still warm. I took a bite. It melted on my tongue. Sweet, a little salty, still carrying the heat of the oven. It didn't taste familiar exactly, but it tasted safe. Like something meant just for me. The note had said to eat first, so I ate. When I finished, I turned to the only door in the room. It was wooden, painted a deep shade of blue, with a brass handle shaped like a fox's head. It looked old, but not in a broken way. More like something that had been waiting. I glanced back at the note on the counter. Then, with a deep breath, I reached for the handle and pushed the door open. And just like that, the kitchen disappeared. And I was somewhere else. The kitchen disappeared the moment I stepped through the door. It wasn't like turning a corner or walking into another room. It was as if the space behind me had never existed at all. No warm cinnamon air, no wooden shelves lined with jars, no bread cooling on the counter. It should have felt unsettling, but instead it was oddly natural, like the house itself was gently guiding me forward. I turned slowly, trying to take in my new surroundings. The room was impossible to describe in one word. It was too big and too small at the same time, stretching up into a vaulted ceiling while somehow still feeling intimate and close. The air smelled of old books and fresh ink, the kind of scent that lingers in ancient libraries, warm and a little dusty. And then I saw them. The books. Not just a few here and there. They were everywhere. Towering stacks lined the walls, arranged in haphazard patterns, some leaning against each other like sleepy giants. More books covered the wooden floor in careful piles, as though someone had started organizing them but never quite finished. But the strangest part, some of them were floating. They bobbed gently in the air as if caught in an unseen tide, their pages flipping lazily before settling back into place. A few hovered just above the shelves, while others drifted freely, spinning slightly as though lost in thought. I took a slow step forward. The floor creaked beneath my weight, a soft, familiar sound that made the room feel lived in, like it had been waiting for me. Something about this place felt familiar. Not in the way a childhood home does, but in the way a story feels familiar when you've read the first few lines and somehow already know how it will end. I reached out to touch one of the floating books. The moment my fingertips brushed the cover, the words on the page shifted. Not just a few sentences, all of them. Letters rearranged themselves, paragraphs twisted into new shapes. Whole chapters rewrote themselves right in front of me.